Okay, I'm really excited about this conversation here. We need to pass the big, beautiful bill, and we need to properly educate the American people on the good stuff in this bill. And joining us now is Steve Moran, chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors in the White House. Steve, great to see you. I think we've crossed each other in the hall a couple times. We were both late to meetings, but it's great to see you on the program.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me, Charlie.
So, Steve, I'm going to give you the floor here. You know this stuff super well. The number one priority legislatively right now needs to pass Trump's big, beautiful bill. Walk us, our audience, through some of the lesser-known economic details as to why this will supercharge the economy, result in middle-class growth, and help young people in particular be able to take ownership of the American economy.
Great. So that's completely right. We need to pass this bill. It is so important to get it over the line because if we don't, it's going to be the biggest tax hike in history, absolute biggest in history, $4 trillion tax hike on American workers and American families that'll plunge the economy back into recession. On the other hand, if we do pass the tax bill, here's what's going to happen. According to a study we just put on our website this morning at the Council of Economic Advisors at the White House, it'll boost the economy by about 4.6 to 4.9% over the next 4 years. So that's a little over 1% a year. It'll boost take-home pay after tax, real income for a typical family of four by about $7,500 to as much as $11,000 over this period, right? So that's more money in your pocket as a result of the bill. More money in your pocket means a healthier economy, a stronger economy, better off families. On top of that, you've got all sorts of deficit reduction coming as a result of this. There's a lot of people who are concerned about the deficit. I understand why. The reason why they're concerned about the deficit is because of a too big focus on the score from the Congressional Budget Office on the one big beautiful bill, which has the bad side effect of focusing only on one little picture, one little corner of the big picture. You've got to see the big picture. The big picture of what's going on is that President Trump's policies will create an economic growth boom, just as they did in the president's first term. And this economic growth boom will bring down deficits, bring down the national debt. We calculated that between the growth benefits as a result of the one big beautiful bill, the growth benefits as a result of the president's deregulatory agenda, cutting red tapes that companies can invest and hire workers when and where they want instead of spending years begging permission from Washington, better growth as a result of the president's energy policies to bring down the price of energy. All of this can in total bring down the deficit by as much as $8.5 to $11 trillion over a 10-year window, right? So this is huge amounts of deficit reduction. Part of this is also the tariffs, right? What the president is doing is raising tons and tons of money by taxing foreigners and using that money to cut taxes on American workers. And I can't think of anything that's a more sensible policy than that. Tariffs on foreigners used to pay for tax reductions on American families and American firms. And that sounds great to me. So you do all this together, you get a number of as much as $11 trillion of lower deficits over the 10-year budget window. And then you look at what that does to the debt to GDP ratio, right? So the current expectations are that it would be as high as 117% by the end of the next 10 years, right? But what the president's policies would do would make it about over 20 points lower than that. 23 percentage points lower than that, right? So this is very, very significant across the entire spectrum of outcomes. It's huge economic growth. It's huge wage growth. It's huge growth in incomes for families. It's huge reductions in deficits, and it's huge reductions in the debt to GDP ratio. And it's such a win to pass this bill. It makes absolute sense. And if we don't pass this bill, if we don't get this bill over the line, it's going to be the biggest tax hike in history. It's going to plunge the economy into recession, and it's going to hand the midterms to the Democrats.
Well, if you put it that way. And so, by the way, so let's dive into some of the details here. The Senate is flirting with getting rid of no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. Will that remain?
That'll remain. Those are some of the president's signature promises from the campaign, and the president always delivers on his signature promises. One by one, the president fulfills all of his campaign pledges, and these are part of that. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, tax relief for seniors. And then those are extraordinarily powerful at keeping more money in people's pockets on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis. And then on top of that, there's huge incentives in the tax bill for firms to invest, for firms to build new factories, for firms to buy more equipment, for firms to increase their productive capacity. These are things like full expensing on equipment, full expensing on new factories and on R&D. And this is how you get firms doing more in America. This is how you get firms hiring workers, by providing incentives for them to invest. They want to hire more American workers. They want to pay American workers more. We're going to make America the best place on earth to do business.
Let's go into some more of the details here. So the extension of the Trump tax cuts, remind people what that means as far as deductibility and what would it mean for general economic growth. Now, we're not totally obsessed with GDP numbers here on this program, but it does matter a lot when you're a debtor nation, which unfortunately we are a debtor nation. You got no choice but to grow. What does the extension of the Trump tax cuts mean for a needed explosion of economic growth?
So the Trump tax cuts from 2017 created the economic boom in the president's first term, which is part of why Americans voted overwhelmingly in a landslide to reelect the president, because they remember what it did for them. Right? They remember that it created record lows of unemployment with no inflation. They remember that it boosted GDP by over $500 billion relative to what people were expecting beforehand. They remember that it boosted real median household income by over $6,000 only a year after it was passed. They remember that it created about double the wage growth that they'd experienced during the length of the Obama administration, when wages were very stagnant. And they also remember that wage growth for the bottom of the income distribution, for Americans in the working class, right, that wage growth was about twice what it was for people who are ultra wealthy, right? So they remember that the first Trump administration was not only an economic boom, it was a blue collar boom. And it was due in very large part to the tax cuts from 2017. And if we don't extend those, if we allow those to expire, it'll be the biggest tax hike in history, a $4 trillion tax hike. It'll plunge the economy into recession. Millions of people will lose their jobs. 9 million people will lose their health insurance, and it'll be a really bad outcome.